Hi, folks. This is Texas State Senator Bob Hall from Senate District 2, and I want to talk with you tonight about election security. Now, I know that that's one of the most important issues that's out there right now. The Texas legislature is in session. It has been identified as one of the most important things we're going to have to do this session. There are a number of senators who have a number of bills on different issues that are being looked at. We've been having hearings on them. We'll still be having some more hearings. And what I wanted to talk with you tonight is about a move to something that everybody agrees that we need to have in our system. That is paper ballots. But some of us view how we go about doing that a little bit differently. Up until now, the thrust has been to use the computer systems, the very complex, expensive, and complicated computer systems, to print out ballots that people can then look at and put into an optical reader to be counted. I think there's a better way to do that, because it makes no sense to me to say that we need to have someone having to turn on a computer, pull up a ballot on a screen, and then use a touch screen to cast their vote, and then use that then to produce a ballot on paper that they then turn around and put in an optical reader, when all in the world they need to do is just mark that ballot with a pencil, with a number 2 pencil. And so I'm going to talk about the insecurity issues relative to our current voting system that has to do with how we go about voting. And I also want to talk to you about how we could institute using paper ballots without having to buy complicated, expensive voting equipment from foreign countries. And so you'll stick with me as I'll go through a presentation here and talk to you about the reasons we have the problems, our proposed solutions, and then I'll describe in a flow chart how we could have a much more secure paper ballot system. So here we go. And now, folks, I want to step you through what I consider to be the Texas solution to the policies and procedures that are adversely affecting election security. Most of our election security has policies and procedures behind it that put us in jeopardy. And I like to cover those, some of the more major ones, and then I'll go through the solution that I'm proposing we do with a paper ballot system. So with that, first I'd like to talk about our elections themselves. The problem we have is that we currently have 3 election activities or times: mail-in ballots, early voting, and election day. Each one of those is its own process. They're each has different characteristics, and it contributes to some of the expense and problems that we have. And the solution I see is that we could combine early voting and election day into one event, an event that begins with the first day of early voting and ends with election day. That would remove the 4-day gap between early voting and election day that we currently have. That is a place that is well known to be the opportunity for those that would want to mess with the voting, for voting fraud, vote manipulation, have the opportunity to do it. So that's the first one. The next one would be to look at voting locations. Now, this is an option. It's not absolutely necessary, but it's one of those that where we trade off convenience or security for convenience, and that is the issue of county-wide voting. The solution I would propose that would make it more secure and make the system run more smoothly is to eliminate county-wide voting and go to strictly precinct-only voting. Now, this is not necessarily a requirement of this process. It just means the trade-off between security and convenience. So the countywide is optional. Most people recognize that it is one of the contributors that makes our system a bit vulnerable. But with what I'm proposing, I think we can overcome that and allow those counties that choose to do so to stick with countywide voting. It just means they're going to have to spend a little more time when the polls close on election day, getting their results printed out at the precinct level. And I'll explain that a little bit later when I get to the flow chart. The next we start talking about the the verification and validation process of knowing for sure that we have the votes that people intended to make in the machines. And that begins with what we call the zero tapes. The zero tapes are supposed to be printed at the precinct just before the polls start on the first day of election, and to validate that there are no votes in the machine. Well, those are not consistently done. We absolutely have to have the zero tapes printed just before the polls open to have assurance that there are no preloaded tapes in the machine. And we can do that by making that an absolute firm requirement that they're printed, signed by the election judge, the deputy judge, and at least one poll watcher from each of the main polls as an absolute requirement of elections. The next is the tally tapes. The problem we currently have is like the zero tapes, they are not consistently printed. Sometimes they're just ignored by the counties. Other places, the Secretary of State has actually provided waivers which allowed them to not be printed. And sometimes counties have used the excuse that the equipment provided by the vendors were just not convenient for the printing of tally tapes. So folks, the tally tapes are absolutely essential in assuring that we have a verified and validated trail of what happens in the voting process. And I'll cover that again later when I go through the flow diagram. But the solution here is to absolutely require that those tally tapes be printed at the location immediately after the poll closes on the last day of the election period, which is election day, and require that those tapes also be signed by the precinct judge, the deputy judge, and at least one poll watcher from each of the main parties. The next item is chain of custody. Currently, there is a very loose requirement with regard to the chain of custody for the memory devices that are transported from the precincts to Central County. We have to institute a requirement that there be an accountable chain of custody when transporting the voting machine memory device. And I'll talk about the memory device a little bit later in the flow chart also. But so that we know exactly when that device leaves the precinct and when it arrives at Central County. The next one is our poll watchers' rights. The current problem we currently have is that poll watchers actually have very few rights that are guaranteed by law. We have too many judges interfering with poll watchers. We have too many reports of poll watchers judges barring poll watchers, not allowing them to see the counts and et cetera, a number of things. We have to have an absolute strong state level policy that clearly defines the rights of poll watchers. The next is risk limiting audits. Currently, we really have no requirements for any audits statewide. No consistency for one county to the other at precincts or the county level. We must have audits to make sure that what the machines are telling us is accurate. So we have to have a state level policy for conducting risk limiting audits. They're used in a number of places, and they're very effective in making as a double check on what's actually happening with elections. And then the equipment. Current problem is we have we're actually using very sophisticated, expensive electronic voting equipment, which requires the use of foreign components made in China. But the major manufacturer all testified not too long ago in a congressional hearing that they cannot make their electronic voting machines without components from China or other countries. And we do know that our electronic voting machines, because they are electronics, are very susceptible to undetected hacking and voting manipulation. And so the solution to this is to adopt a statewide policy, such as hand-marked paper ballots, which can be processed with less sophisticated optical scanners. There is absolutely no reason that we have to use expensive, complicated electronic equipment to simply make a mark, fill in a circle on a piece of paper on where we want to vote. We need to have a verifiable voter trail. The current policy, electronic voting, even with computer generated paper trails, is subject to manipulation just because the computers are involved in it. Our solutions is a statewide voting process where at the precinct, we use hand-marked standardized ballots printed on special paper. We use optical scanners with a write once optical disc, memory disc, and that has a tally tape print capability to match whether there's countywide or precinct voting. At the central county, we need an optical disc reader tabulator with a printer, a secure transmitter link, and a secure one-way VPN Wi-Fi or LAN link with a public-private key. And at the state level, Secretary of State's office, a secure link receiver, not Wi-Fi or Bluetooth capable, a memory device to transfer voter tabulations from the receiver to the state computer system. And then we need to have audits. We need to be able to audit the entire process end to end, and I'm going to describe it to you in just a minute on how we can do that and how this system provides an auditable trail every step of the way. And it would be complete bi-directional paper trail audit from the state, from the precinct, the state to the county to the precinct. And this is a diagram of the process I'm talking about, where over here on the left, we're talking about at the precinct level, what we'll be doing. The county level is here in red, and what happens at the Secretary of State is in green. And so now let's talk about these one at a time. Let's talk about the precinct level, where we begin with the voter and how we enter into this. And this is with a hand-marked paper ballot. We use special paper that has watermarks or other codes in it to make it more difficult. Now, each one of these things that we'll be talking about here, nothing is foolproof. Believe me, man has a way of getting around most anything that happens. What we're talking about here is making it extremely difficult for people to circumvent the system. But that ballot itself would require the judges to initial the back of the vote, not to put a stamp on it, but a judge's initial on it. And there would be a chain of custody of both the paper ballots from the precinct and the memory disk. Once a person votes, they simply put it in the optical scanner that records that vote on a write once optical disc, not a memory stick that can be written and rewritten over several times, but a disc that is designed so that once it's written on, it can't be written on again. And then also the hand-marked paper ballots would be stored in that scanner. But before the elections start, the optical scanner would have a printer capability. So the beginning of the day, first thing in the morning before the polls open, the zero tape is printed. That confirms that there are no votes in that machine before anybody starts voting. And then at the end of election day, the tally tapes are printed. Now, this equipment that's put at the precinct or wherever they're put throughout the county would remain in place from the day it's put in place until the end of election day. It cannot be moved around or changed to location. It stays there. Once the zero tapes is printed, it doesn't move until after the election over, when you have the tally tape printed. And so once that's done, the end of election is over with, we can then transport the write once disc to the county, to Central County, where it's put into a card reader tabulator. It doesn't have to be, particularly not to be a computer, but whatever it is, it has no Wi-Fi or Bluetooth capability. It simply takes the disc from each of the precincts is brought in, reads them, tabulates what the votes are for each of the people on the ballot, and they're able to print out exactly what that card reader just tabulated in collecting up the votes from all the precincts, which can very easily be then compared to the tally tape from the precinct to confirm that we're getting the same votes here at the county level that came out of the precinct. the tabulator, once it's done, would take and transfer the totals for that county on a memory card to a secure link transmitter with a firewall, and would also print out exactly what was transferred up to the secure link. Now, once that's done, then going to the state level, the transmission going from the county would be a secure one-way VPN, Wi-Fi, or a landline link with a public-private key. Folks, this is the type of security that those folks that work in the areas where they require secure communications. This is not over the internet, but it's as secure we get is for transmission to a receive-only link at the state level. No Wi-Fi capability and no Bluetooth. The state would collect up this information and print out, again, the totals for each of the counties that then could be compared back to the county totals that can still be compared back to the precinct level. So you have bidirectional verification of hard copy of what the votes were. Once this is completed at the state level, the state can then make a memory card transfer to the state computer where the information is put out for the public to see. At the precinct level, the issue with state countywide versus precinct voting, if a county decides it wants to do countywide voting, there would probably be a little extra time required to print out all the tally tapes for that county. But again, it's giving up a little bit of inconvenience just to make sure we have a secure system. Now let's talk about what this advantage of doing this really is. Take them one at a time here. This will minimize electronic vulnerabilities. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that electronics are our most vulnerable part of our of our election system. There's no accountability for ones and zeros in those computers. And I'll say that today, that anybody that has been elected using electronic voting, you could not prove in a court of law that that was actually the intent of the people that went to the polls and voted for them. But with a paper ballot system, you could do that. We could do that. The second, it absolutely simplifies the voting process. Why in the world we need to have a touchscreen, complicated computers, expensive computer systems out there to simply fill in a circle on a piece of paper that then gets counted makes no sense at all. This is be a process that anybody could use and understand easily. It will significantly reduce the use of electronic equipment cost, because basically what we're talking about are optical scanners. They are not very expensive, probably the least expensive thing in the whole process. It increased transparency. This is something that you can observe from the very beginning, every step of the way, and make sure as it goes along that everything matches with what the previous step was. And it increases our accountability. There is no step in this process in which whoever is doing it cannot be held completely accountable for what comes out at their step. And one of the most important is this could be done with using made in America voting equipment. We would not have to depend on equipment coming from China or any foreign country to do this. The equipment here is simple enough that it could be all American made. It minimizes the amount of software, which is another place that there is a great opportunity for fraud to take place and for errors to be introduced. And it allows for a standardized statewide election process. Currently, Texas has 254 voting processes in Texas. Each county does it the way they want to do it. This would allow for a standardized process that would bring uniformity and increase security. It is far more user-friendly. Most people know how to use the number 2 pencil, and that's all they would need to know how to use to do this. It's significant. It essentially eliminates the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth security threats to outside intervention in the electronics that we now would not need in this system. And for sure, it allows for an end-to-end voter verification validation process each step of the way. And it allows for standardized ballot size, formats, and security throughout the state. So let's talk about what all this really means. There's a takeaway. The conclusion that I hope you will get from looking at going to an all paper ballot system that minimizes electronics is that the big thing, it does not suppress voting. There is no voter suppression. Matter of fact, this will greatly increase the opportunities for people to vote, because there are a lot of people who actually don't go vote because they don't like to deal with computers. They're afraid of them, and they spend a lot of time getting help on how to use them. And what it does do, the highlights of it are simply, it simplifies voting, it reduces cost, and it increases security. And it allows for American-made equipment. Folks, I think this path is what we've been looking for significantly improving our election system. All right, folks, that's it. That's the concept. That's how we'd go about doing it. I think it's easy, it's simple. It'll save us money, save us time, and it is far more secure than using expensive, complicated electronic equipment that's subject to being hacked by those who would want to change the votes by foreign countries. And it can be done with equipment that could be manufactured right here in America. And we could have this implemented where we can have this done by the next election. So if you have any questions, please feel free to call us here in our office. If you agree with this, let your representative, senator, lieutenant governor, and governor know what you think about it, and help us get this passed. In the meantime, God bless you. God bless Texas.